next a little bit about boundaries. So healthy boundaries, learning how to say no. This kind of goes hand in hand with this one right here, because learning to say no is one of the most important things that you can do. And again, I'm going to keep picking on moms tonight. Moms are the worst at this because they always want to take on more because they want to be helpful, right? But learning when to say no and learning how to say no and learning what to say no to are very, very important. You can't take on more than what you can take on. And especially, again, going back to the theme of this show is self-love for chronic illness. So if you're struggling with chronic illness and you can't learn to say no, then what you're actually doing is you're taking on other people's problems, other people's busy work, other people's things that you don't already have time to do these things for yourself, but now you're taking on more because you don't know how to say no. Because a lot of people in today's society, again, this is a social kind of pressure thing, is that they feel guilty if they do say no. There's some type of, many of you are kind of honed in to not saying no because you have a sense of guilt if you do say no. So you have to learn what's reasonable, what is a reasonable expectation of yourself and what you're reasonably capable of achieving over the course of a day without self-sacrificing yourself to such a great degree that your health deteriorates. So part of that is learning how to say no. So where do we draw some of the boundaries? We draw boundaries at work. We draw boundaries at school. If you're going to school, we also draw boundaries at home. Okay, those are kind of the primary areas for most people where you really want to draw boundaries around it. And you draw boundaries, especially, I say at home, but also with secondary family, because this boundary might be another family member who's not part of your, not part of your prime unit, not part of your at-home family, but maybe a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, something along those lines. And so you're being drug into doing things that maybe you just don't have time to do, but you feel guilty by saying no. So again, analyzing these things and honoring yourself to say, look, if I don't have time already to take care of these needs, but now I'm going to take care of all of these needs, all I'm really going to do is further deteriorate my own health. So being realistic about it, because if you're not, again, what's going to end up happening is very, very predictable. The chronic illness will not go away because your body's not going to respond to chronic levels of stress because you don't have clear boundaries set up in your relationships and in what you're doing in this world. So it's very, very important. Now, let's talk about number 4, surrounding yourselves with others who are good for you. I like to use the term tribe. Build your tribe of people like you, not diatribe, not people who are going to bring you down, talk negative or derogatory to you. And we all have that. Like we all have the crabs in the bucket. We all have the crabs in our life, but we also all have people that we love and care about, but we love them, but we don't necessarily like them. And so sometimes it's hard to draw that line. And many of you struggle with drawing that line in the sand and saying, look, yeah, I love you. I care about you, but I don't necessarily want to be around you. So in those types of scenarios, sometimes you have to make decisions about not surrounding yourself, even though they may be family. They may not be what's best for you when you're trying to overcome a chronic illness. Now, it's another thing. I missed an I. I did. It's another thing if you're healthy and you're going to be around, let's say your aunt or your uncle or somebody in your family, and you don't get along very well, but it's a short burst. It's just like this short time frame, and you're going to probably argue with that person, but you're not going to extend the time that you spend with that individual to any great degree. That's not the same thing. I'm talking about consistently day in and day out. You want to surround others that are good for you, and you don't want to surround yourself by the negative talk, the negative emotions, because you already have enough of those. Most people do. We're our own worst critics, right? We talk negative about ourselves more than anyone else will. We don't need other people filtering in to help us. So you want to identify who those people are that are good for you and that are caring and supportive and loving of you, and you want to identify those people who are not. And then, the diatribe, you'll cut back on the diatribe. These are think about it as your frenemies, right? The people who, maybe you perceive to be friends, but they're really not really ever very supportive. And so sometimes this is one of the hardest things to do because, again, we go back to that sense of guilt. There's a sense of guilt where we don't want to tell some of these frenemies no when they ask us for favors, but then when they're around us, we get all the diatribe. And so that what we have done is we built a tribe of people that pull us down consistently over time, and that's going to derail your health. It's going to derail your path back to good health. So identify who those people are and learn how to get away from them as much as possible, or spend as little amount of time with them as possible. Again, setting those clear boundaries. So there's a lot of overlap between some of these. And then the fifth one is the power of self-forgiveness. So let's dive into this a little bit. So we are always our own critic. Any of you, I guess, if I ask the question, how many of you have your own conversations in your head every day? And a lot of times that conversation is negative and has a negative impact on the way that you think and feel. So being your own critic, like you come down on yourself harder than anyone else will. And so part of this is knowing that as a human, we're all human, right? So as part of the human tribe, as a general rule of thumb, none of us are perfect, right? Human equals not perfect. And so in that regard, sometimes we're going to make mistakes. Sometimes we're going to do things incorrectly. I see this again. I'm picking on moms again, but mistakes, parental mistakes. And then they live in this constant state of hypercriticism and lack of self-forgiveness over things that their kids are doing. A close friend of mine once told me, he said that parents oftentimes take far too much credit for their children's achievements and far too much credit for their failures. And so to me, that really stuck with me because our children are they're their own people. Of course, we're there to guide them. We're there to set an example and lead by example. And if we're having adequate self-love and setting adequate example here, then they're getting the foundational learning that they need. They're going to make mistakes and they're going to do great things. And you can't always take the credit as the parent one way or the other. And so you have to learn to forgive yourself because parenting is going to be a big mistake. Or I shouldn't say a big mistake, but a lot of mistakes spaced out over a long period of time. And so if you're constantly criticizing yourself and your parenting ability, again, this is just an area where I see in my clinic, I see a lot of women really, really struggle with this one, this self-criticism over their parenting, over their worry over whether or not they're parenting the right way. Because again, some of this it's a grand experiment. Nobody knows the perfect way to parent a child. There are plenty of books written on the topic, but at the end of the day, every parent is different and every child is different. Even your children are all different. And you may have 3 children that require 3 different parenting styles. So you can't be too hard on yourself. So you've got to be able to forgive yourself. We're all imperfect. Your failures, big important thing here is that when you do fail, right, you forgive yourself, provided that your failures are lessons. And that really is the walk away. Some people look at their failures as the end. That's it. I failed. And then they get into this kind of failure self-criticism cycle, and it's just repetitively going over and over and over again. But failures, if we're paying attention, again, if we're following number 1, failures are lessons that we can learn from so that hopefully we don't make the same or repetitive mistakes over and over and over again. That's when we truly fail, is when we forget to learn or we don't learn from the mistake. So these 5 components to me are the critical pieces to loving yourself and all healing, right? All healing. And this is 20 years of practical experience. All healing begins with bluntness. I say bluntness, we'll say blunt truth, hard truths, blunt truth. And so sometimes it's these 5 things that we lie to ourselves about. We tell ourselves we can make it by without the proper food and exercise. We'll just bulldoze it through. And we lie to ourselves and we justify those behaviors and those actions. I mean, raise your hand if you've ever justified those actions. I sure have. And we lie to ourselves about these things. And so then we set the cycle up for failure on self-love. And again, when that happens, it makes it really, really hard for healing to begin or for healing to become complete. So hopefully this lesson in self-love is helpful for you this Valentine's Day when you're getting ready to express and experience and share the holiday that has become kind of the theme of love. So hopefully this is helpful for you if you're struggling. Hey, and if you missed the earlier part of this series, click right here so you can go back and get caught up. The information there might be critical to helping you on your path to better health. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe for updates below. Have a great day.